Well, it continued through into Saturday. Maybe it's the new track surface, maybe it's the gusts of wind, maybe it's the heat. I think Oscar Piastri used the right word when he said, yeah, a couple of the laps are a bit scruffy. Scruffy it was. Lots of unanswered questions in many ways. I think the first, of course, is to continue to acknowledge the incredible grip and downforce that the McLaren-Mercedes enjoys at the moment. On this occasion, it was Oscar Piastri that got the best from it, and he got the pole. Brilliant pole. His first pole, amazing. I thought he probably had about 4 by now. Yeah, first proper pole for Oscar Piastri, so congratulations to him. But that reflected, I think, more the poor weekend so far that Lando Norris has had. Not a great day yesterday on Friday. It looked a bit scratchy in the car, didn't qualify well for the sprint race, didn't race well either in the sprint race, got bogged down, ran wide on the first lap, and then got trapped in traffic for the entire sprint race. Didn't do much for his confidence, for sure. Made a few changes to the car, as they would going into qualifying. It's out of parc fermé for that period. But he still didn't look great in the car. And his quickest lap in Q3, the lap should have put him at least on the front row of the grid, if not on the pole, went away when he just went too quickly into the hairpin and ran wide, and that was it. He just drove straight back into the pit lane. So a lot of mistakes from Lando Norris. But then he's the driver I've been saying, certainly been saying after the Australian Grand Prix, with the sort of touch he has, the sensitivity that he has, he should always be able to put it over Oscar Piastri, so long as Oscar continues to drive more or less like Lando Norris. Well, today that didn't happen. And I think it's quite significant that the first 2 positions on the grid, Oscar Piastri and then George Russell in the Mercedes, are taken by 2 drivers who are wide entry, fairly late braking, and right on the edge of what they want to achieve at any given moment. And that manifested itself in various different ways. I guess I'm getting around to saying I don't think we saw the best from the McLarens today. And had Lando been driving as Lando normally does, I think he probably would have been quicker than Oscar Piastri. But because he just had he's had 2 bad days, it was Oscar Piastri that got the pole in what is quantifiably still the best car out there. So again, that's not to detract from Oscar. It's just to try to explain, for example, how near George Russell came to getting the pole, and to explain also how Lewis Hamilton, with a great lap yesterday, a great clean lap that got him the pole just from Max Verstappen, parlayed that into the win that we talked about last night. Amazing for Lewis Hamilton to lead from the pole and lead the sprint race from start to finish. Helped a little bit by Max challenging for a while, and just when he was on the point maybe of passing Lewis in DRS, very similar top speeds between the Red Bull and the Ferrari, his front tyres went away. So he then systematically fell back into the clutches of Oscar Piastri. And by the time Oscar had got past him, he had overused his tyres and he couldn't do anything about Lewis. That's, again, it's not to detract from Lewis's achievement, but that's how the race panned out. So brilliant for Lewis Hamilton to win that race. But it kind of explains why it's all looking so close. And I suppose we'll never know whether it's the track surface, the heat, or other things that are coming into play, the wind, for example, in China. What we can say is that there were characteristics of the 2 laps that resulted in the front row in qualifying. And one comes under the heading of my love of turn 7, that very, very quick left-hander. Uphill approach, then it just falls away downhill before they go into the left-hander there. And definitely there you can see a Max Verstappen turning in earlier than most. You can see a Charles Leclerc turning in earlier than most there as well. But what was impressive, I thought, was that by my count, only 4 drivers were absolutely flat in 7th, which is over 5G lateral going into turn 7 today. And they were the 2 McLaren drivers, Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc, would you believe, in the other Ferrari. Everybody else had a slight lift going into 7. And sometimes it really worked. For George Russell, that worked perfectly. And maybe it meant that his tyres were just in perfect shape for the last sector, because he just saved that little bit of energy there. So it's worth noting that Lando Norris, on the lap that he aborted, was absolutely flat through turn 7 as well, like Oscar. But then there was a difference between Oscar and Lando at the point where Lando made his mistake, which was at the end of the main straight, having gone through the speed trap. Very similar top speeds. Oscar Piastri, absolutely brilliant, I thought, in braking for the hairpin. I was going on in Australia about how good Lando was into turn 4, high-speed braking there. Very different set of circumstances in terms of what the track is like there, the corner you're going into, the conditions, the ambient, everything else, different tyres as well, of course. Here, going into the hairpin, Oscar Piastri takes a little bit of speed out of the car, 15 kilometers an hour, 330 down to 315, without even touching the brakes. He's got the car nice and settled, and then he goes for the brakes. Absolutely beautiful. Lewis Hamilton, by contrast, did it a different way, and he's very, very good under high-speed braking as well. Lewis is absolutely flat on the throttle, and then when he gets to the braking area, for a millisecond, he puts his foot on the brake, but doesn't actually slow the car down. He's got pedal. He's absolutely feather-light touch on the brake pedal pressure, settling the car, and then he brakes hard. Two different ways of doing it. Just superb. George Russell was all about perfect synchronization between brake and throttle. So the millisecond he comes out of the throttle, he's on the brakes, like Max Verstappen. Very different approach again. But I thought it was really interesting that the two drivers on the front row of the grid had the two lowest minimum speeds in the middle of the hairpin, 65 kilometers an hour. Lando Norris obviously went in too quickly. It was like 71, 72 kilometers an hour. That was the slowest he ever got. But it's significant, is it not, that it's breaking down into that very, very slow minimum speed. And high minimum speed in the hairpin doesn't gain you any ground whatsoever. I should add, actually, there was one other driver who I saw was flat through turn 7, and that was Alex Albon in the Williams. Really, really good. Obviously, the car, very difficult to get the Williams to work all around the lap, but through turn 7, flat, absolutely, just like the two McLaren drivers. Very impressive from Alex Albon there. Anyway, getting back to George Russell, he does have a lift going into 7. And he also did two other things differently from everybody else on his quick lap. And he was doing it for most of the weekend, indeed. Through the turn 1, 2, 3 section, at the slowest point of that, when they're going around that little left-hander, George is the only driver that I saw going back to second gear. Everybody else in third, including Antonelli in third through there, which is characteristic of George. Just wants to get on top of the car, a few more revs, just control the back end. So that I'm not sure many other drivers could actually be quick if they'd use second gear there, but George, it just perfectly matched the way he drives. And he did the same thing going into it in turn 6, tight right hander, preceded by the longish straight in which they're in 7th gear. George goes down to second there as well. So did Antonelli at that point. So the two Mercedes are in second, but McLaren-Mercedes, Williams-Mercedes in third through there, Ferrari in third, Red Bull in third. And again, that's just classic George Russell, isn't it? Just right on top of the car. And then maybe he's just got a little bit more speed, maybe he's got a little bit more traction, but then he saves the tyres. Maybe that's why he's doing it. I'm sure George wouldn't like to hear, oh, he spooked himself out going into 7. He just lifts slightly going into 7, like Lewis, compared with Charles, who's absolutely flat. And it's interesting, isn't it? Both Lewis and George, very, very quick in sector 2, but they both lifted going into 7. So here I am going on about the tough guys who are flat through 7. Well, we've got to enjoy ourselves sometimes, and it's just amazing to hear that engine there, wow, in through 7 over 5G lateral. Really impressive corner. And Oscar Piastri just on rails through there. Amazing to watch. So it was all, lots of things going on. Slightly different selection of gears in some cases. Use of turn 7, how they went into the hairpin. It eventually came down to who lost the least time on the slow corners, which is to say turns 1, 2, and 3, and that, well, once you're through the entry to 1, and then of course the hairpin at the end of the lap. The other thing I just say about George, the incredible thing about George's lap and how good it was that he knew he was quick, obviously, on that lap, and it's so tempting, especially a reflexy driver like George, to maybe break a fraction too late into the hairpin, but he didn't. He was absolutely disciplined. And we saw that in some of his radio messages today. There was a moment I think it was in Q1, when there was a bit of a panic because he hadn't got through into the top 15 at some point. And I don't know what was going on, but I mean, he did the time easily, of course. Then he got on the radio in the break between Q1 and Q2 and said, guys, just stay calm. We should stick to the plan. Don't worry about it. Everything's going to be okay. No stress. And I just thought that was really nice. A little bit of a contrast to the sort of frenetic stuff we heard from Lewis in Melbourne. But of course, very different Lewis today in China, having won the sprint race, and Ferrari kind of on top of things. The other thing to say about Ferrari, just going on, I mean, Lewis did a good job today, probably got the best from the car. I think the Ferrari is quite a good all-round car. Nothing like the same grip as the McLaren, as we know. But Lewis did a good job to get the best from it. And Charles Leclerc actually quicker than Lewis in Q1 and Q2 and not far away in Q3. So he really picked himself up. He said at one point before Q3, I think he said, we need to focus on the entry to turn 6, which is that right-hander, the tight right-hander I was just talking about, where George is in second and he's in third. But I'm not sure he was right there. I think more he needed to focus on whether he should be saving the tyres through 7 and giving himself more grip in the final sector, going into the hairpin and stuff like that. And Charles overall not dramatically quick anywhere, but pretty good everywhere. And you just get the feeling he's probably going to have half a reasonable race tomorrow. He usually goes quite well in the race when it's difficult, when Deg is the big catchword of the day. So we look at the grid then. We got Oscar Piastri on the pole. And in a race where tyre deg is going to be absolutely critical, it's a bit like the wet, really. If you're in front, you've got a serious advantage. And he can control the pace, and he doesn't have debris or any of that stuff, turbulence on the tyres. And he can look after the tyres much more efficiently than if you're in traffic. So it's a double whammy, this pole, I think, in China. Assuming he can get the lead going into the first corner, which I'm sure he will. George Russell on the dirty side of the grid, P2. He's going to struggle with tyre deg for sure. He'll be pushing Oscar pretty hard in the early laps, knowing George, assuming Oscar takes the lead, and that will be tough on his tyres. And Mercedes already will be saying, look, if you're P2, make sure you look after the tyres. Anyway, it'll be that sort of race. And Lando will be behind him, probably with more chance to manage the tyres. He won't be able to do as good a job with tyre management as Oscar if Oscar's in front. But he will be, because they've got more grip at McLaren, they can use the tyres more efficiently. And so he'll be pushing George hard. And then we've got Max, who would be disappointed, I think, to be P4 in qualifying. And as I say, in the sprint race today, it just showed the shortcomings of the Red Bull right now. Just nothing like the same grip as the McLarens, and probably not quite as good as the Ferrari right now. So yeah, a difficult day. I mean, Max, I think, got the best from that car. Not much more he could have done. Pretty good laps, but and they're pretty quick on the straight, which is a good thing. And that's why it took Piastri so long to get Max on the straight in the sprint race. But he's going to have a tough race tomorrow, I think, even to beat George Russell. It's going to be pretty close between Red Bull and Mercedes, and then he's going to have at least one, if not both, Ferraris around him as well. So Max would have wanted to have been on the front row just to try to get away from everybody, but where he is, it's not going to be that easy for him. Lewis will be absolutely delighted with the way things have gone, and to be starting ahead of Charles Leclerc as well is a nice little bonus for him. Charles has just been in a weird situation. He did make up a lot of ground. He just didn't get the lap perfectly, and we've seen weekends from Charles like this, and usually when he has terrible qualifying like this, he does, as I say, get it together in the race. So we'll see what happens there. Isaac Hadjar, superb job in the Racing Bulls to be 7th after everything had happened in Melbourne, and then to put it together like this and drive that well. There were 2 key moments for me in Isaac's lap, and one was going into the last corner, where he was off brakes and throttle just for a millisecond, just to let the car settle, as indeed Lando was when he was not making mistakes. And then he did the same thing, turn 2-3 on the slow bit there. He's just letting the car settle beautifully. Just really nice. Obviously backing off a little bit through 7. Why wouldn't you? As was Yuki Tsunoda. But really nice to watch, and starting to confirm what we saw earlier, that he does have that feel for getting into corners a little bit earlier as well. A little bit, as I used to say about Oscar versus Lando, assuming Oscar can build on his short corner talent, that's the way he's the only chance he got of beating Lando, unless Lando has an off day. I say Lando has an off day. Let's just think about that. I don't think Lando had an off day. It's because he does turn in quite late, and he does brake quite late and all those things. He's got the great touch. We know that. He does come out of the brakes and throttle beautifully. But it does put him right on the edge when it's one of these fractious weekends of tyre degradation and gusts and heat and getting the tyres to perform and slow on the straight. All those things combined make it very difficult if you are relying on a very late wide turn in and late braking going into that, of course. And that's what we're seeing, an early throttle application. Antonelli did a very good job, but definitely backing off more than George through 7. I say George lifted into 7. He just lifted slightly, whereas Antonelli backed off big time into 7, for example. And as I said, that's at the moment, it's the fast corners that are a problem for Antonelli. Not a problem. That's where he's going to hopefully make the most improvement from his perspective. But on the slow stuff, look really, really good. Right on top of it. Very, very good indeed. Yuki Tsunoda, well, we know how good he is. And Alex Albon, I've already said, wow, flat into turn 7 as well. Other performances, Esteban Ocon did a good job, I thought, to get the Haas into P11, having had a bad Melbourne and really a bad weekend up until now. So that was good. Nico Hülkenberg made up for yesterday to get into Q2 as well in the Sauber. Both Aston Martins failed to make it out of Q2. Fernando on this occasion just ahead of Lance Stroll. And Carlos Sainz, considerably slower than Alex Albon, struggling again with when all these variables come into play. Really difficult for a guy like Carlos in a new team, in a new car. Obviously not a brilliant car either in terms of consistency of balance and grip around the lap to stay on top of it. Late breaker, wide turn-in driver that he is. Pierre Gasly didn't make it out of Q1, but did have a very good racy sprint race today. He passed quite a lot of cars, looked quite good, but that experience didn't really result in a decent qualifying performance, so disappointing for them. Oliver Behrman, P17, Jack Doohan, both of them had their issues. Bortoleto, and then Liam Lawson, again, absolutely out of his depth in the second Red Bull. Again, this highlights how difficult that car is and how good a job Max Verstappen's doing in that car. That's the first point. But secondly, he is, I find it absolutely extraordinary that in his post-race comments, he's talking about, I'm still confident, I just need to be quicker. That's not the way. I mean, the way is to think about why he's slow. And the reason he's slow, in my opinion, is because he's nothing but a late-braking, oversteer, wide turn-in driver who's never going to be flattered, as we saw with Carlos Sainz, in conditions like this. And Carlos struggling for exactly the same reason that Liam Lawson's struggling, just more so because Liam's much more inexperienced, and I presume the Red Bull even more difficult to drive than the Williams. So, he, instead of saying, I'm very confident, I just need to go faster, I need to get through this stage, he should be saying, I need to start working on, shorter corners and giving myself a bigger platform, a bigger palette on which to operate with all these variables that come into play. And I'm going to learn about that from Max Verstappen and doing lots of work behind the scenes, presumably with somebody like Rob Wilson. I can't think of any other solution. Of course, there will be moments coming up when Liam Lawson will be quick, when he has a decent amount of grip, decent amount of balance. And of course, we know he's got great car control. But it's these moments when all the variables are against him that it's not good enough just to say, I need to be quicker. That's not the answer. The answer is he needs to start shortening the corners and giving himself a much bigger margin in which to operate amongst the variables. And he's never done that in his life. All he's ever done is driven with the rear of the car, never the front. And that's, but then again, you say, well, Red Bull must know that. They must have known that when they decided to replace Sergio Perez. They must have thought, well, we're sick of having this guy who's so good on traction but not very good on understeer. We want a guy that can really throw the car around when he's got understeer. We'll get Liam Lawson. But did they say to themselves, well, in that case, what are we going to do if it's like it is in China, as it is in China or was in Melbourne? All those variables in there, the wet, the wind, the heat, whatever it is, the tyres degging. What's he going to do? Probably in this situation, Perez would have got more out of the car because he would have been much kinder to the rear tyres. I know it's the front tyre here that's an issue, but he certainly would have done a good job with the rear tyres. Anyway, it just strikes me, I'm having a bit of a rant, but it just strikes me, if you're going to replace a driver, know the driver that you are bringing into the team intimately, the way he drives. Don't just think, oh yeah, he's really quick and he's got a great handshake and looks cool in this jacket or whatever they're thinking. We know Liam Lawson's quick, but he's only quick if he's got a massive amount of grip and balance, and then he can be a real racing driver. But, when it's finessey. And then I guess the final comment is that I've been going on all winter about Lando Norris's biggest problem is not, has he got the mentality to take the race to a Lewis Hamilton or a Max Verstappen or a George Russell. Lando Norris's biggest problem throughout 2025, as I've been saying, is always going to be Oscar Piastri. And Oscar is not slow. He's still not as quick as he could be, but he's not slow at all, as we saw today. A fabulous lap by Oscar Piastri. And that is the biggest problem for Lando Norris in terms of winning the 2025 championship. The guy who's in the same car as he is beating him. And it's going to be difficult for him tomorrow. Oscar from the pole. And it's actually, from McLaren's point of view, it's worked out as well as could be expected because they don't have this problem of how to sort out the battle between Oscar and Lando, because by the time Lando gets free of George and Max, which in theory he will, Oscar will be long gone and his tyres will be in better shape anyway, in theory. So yeah, that solved that problem for McLaren for the weekend. So yeah, Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri, that is the battle. And we have a battle now. Oscar did that lap, and Lando so far has driven with too many mistakes this weekend, given the style that he has and how good he is. So there we go. See what happens tomorrow. Should be a fascinating race. See you then.